Welcome back to the Canine Campus Podcast. This is Stace, and right now we've got a special report on how adoption and rescue organizations can use the internet, new media, and the same strategies major advertisers are employing to help further their cause and get animals placed without putting further strain on their budgets or other precious resources. If you work in rescue, this show is for you. Our guest is Dan Goldgeier. Dan is an Atlanta-based advertising copywriter and videographer. He's also the author of the regular View from the Cheap Seats column on talentzoo.com. Dan's an ad school graduate and an expert in how organizations can use media such as the internet to not only spread their message, but how to do so with bottom-line focused results. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Stace.
Dan, you're working with the Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia. I'm going to read from their web copy for a moment here. They're a no-kill shelter that rescues abandoned, neglected, and abused dogs that might otherwise be euthanized by local animal control organizations. In addition, the rescue works with other organizations that specialize in puppy mill rescues. The rescue currently houses approximately 75 dogs that are in outside kennels at 2 different locations and in foster homes. The dogs saved by the rescue are spayed or neutered, vaccinated, treated for any medical issues, and then placed with folks who prefer to adopt, as it kindly states, unwanted dogs rather than purchase breeder dogs. So, Dan, tell me about your relationship with the ARL and how you got involved with them.
Certainly. The Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia is located in Calhoun, which is about an hour and 15 minutes north of Atlanta, where I am.
Right. Okay.
And I had a friend who was actually an advertising broadcast producer named Laura Dobson, and she is from Calhoun.
Oh, okay.
So she does, and she's an animal lover. She's a dog lover. She's here in Atlanta, but she goes up there quite a bit, and she volunteers with the Animal Rescue League and helps them if they can find dogs in Calhoun that may be adoptable in Atlanta. She brings them down, and she has worked with the owner of the Animal Rescue League. So she asked me if we wanted to put together a video to generate some fundraising for them. It's a hard time for everybody, really.
Right.
And nonprofit organizations have a particularly tough time in this economy.
Yeah, no kidding.
I said, sure, this sounds like it's a great cause. It's a great organization. And we met them when they came down to an adoption day at a PetSmart here in the Atlanta area. So I got to meet the owner, and I got to meet some of the dogs.
Right.
And what really struck me was the love and care that they bring to all the dogs that they take care of, but they also are very good on camera. We started putting together a fundraising video, and I said, this is all well and good. Hopefully they can get some donations where they can, but these dogs, we put them at PetSmart on during the Christmas holiday season, and you get to see these 3-year-olds and 4-year-old kids come up and play with these dogs, and you realize that these dogs are not what I thought shelter dogs would be hyper or, maybe problematic in some way.
Right.
Some of these dogs were just docile and very friendly and wonderful with kids, and the kids would just automatically respond to them. I said, this is a wonderful thing for people to see.
Yeah.
I would be more likely to adopt a dog if I would see how well this dog interacts with children.
They sell themselves, huh?
They do. Well, they do sell themselves in a sense.
Yeah.
So we put together a fundraising video, but then we went back up to Calhoun, and we filmed about 30 or 35 dogs.
Wow.
And we had the daughter of the proprietor would sit and describe these dogs because they knew their dog's history. They knew whether a dog was good with kids or whether a dog really needed an outdoor, a backyard to go run and play.
Right.
And so, we spent a long afternoon filming these dogs, and when I got home, I realized, we can do something with this. We can spread the word. We can get some of these dogs adopted because, being that this Animal Rescue League is a little off the beaten path, they have a tough time getting publicity for themselves and bringing attention to the fact that they have dogs that really do need homes.
So it sounds like this went from we're gonna help out really briefly by doing this promotional video and help them do a little fundraising, and you dove right into what sells these dogs is their wonderful temperament, and that's what people really need to see. Let's get it on tape and figure out what to do with it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. This organization, of course, they could use some donations, and they do let you sponsor a dog without actually adopting it. But they have a lot of dogs that really do need homes, and these dogs, they're all spayed and neutered. They've been well taken care of. They're most of them are incredibly friendly, very playful, and when you see that on video, it beats anything like, instead of going to see a picture, reading a description of the dog or seeing a picture of the dog. When you see the dog interact with people, you get a real sense of, this dog is right for me.
Well, yeah, no kidding. And, I'll full disclosure here, I live in the South as well, and we have 2 hounds from rescue, and they're the greatest dogs in the world. And they really do, once you go to a shelter and see them, if you make the trip, you understand kind of the benefit to that kind of temperament. It's just kind of amazing. But let me ask you this now. Was there any thought to, how did you bridge the gap between we're going to, obviously people need to see this, and then how they're going to see it? I mean, of course, you videotaped. What did you decide to do with the videotapes at that point?
Well, there are a number of things that I knew I could do. Number one, I knew how to edit these videos in such a fashion that we could make them 1-minute clips that we could put on the internet in some form. And there's a number of ways we can do that. One of the first things I did was I have an account on Facebook in which I've been, it's living in the Atlanta area. I have a lot of Atlanta friends. I put a link up and said, hey, if you guys are looking for a dog or you know somebody who needs a dog, here's a link to a whole bunch of dogs. And what I did is I took all those clips, each dog, and put them on YouTube, which is accessible by anybody in the world. If you go to youtube.com/animalrescuenwga, you can see all 30 of these dogs that we filmed. And so I spread the word there. There's also a highly organized database of shelters called petfinder.com.
Right.
And the Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia has a page on petfinder.com. What Petfinder does is it also accepts videos through its system. So let's say you're doing a search, you want a German Shepherd, and you want it in the North Georgia area. You can type in that information, and it will come back with a list of 100 dogs that are available to be adopted that are German Shepherds in the Atlanta area, and it'll have an icon that says there's a video available for this. So if you do a search, let's say you pull up this list of 100 dogs, which ones are you going to want to see? You're going to want to see the ones that have videos attached to them.
Sure.
Because they're more descriptive, you'll get more out of it. And so it gives the Animal Rescue League a bit of a leg up. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is, classic click and mortar strategy, right? I think what's really interesting about what you're doing is this is a kind of a traditional rescue environment, and you're not changing anything about what you're doing there, but you're taking advantage of these tools. And I think it's important to note that this is all free, right? The YouTube thing, the Facebook thing, any other tools that you're using online. It's just the work that's involved to create the videos, get them uploaded.
Yeah, YouTube, everybody's doing that now. There's no cost to do it. You just have to go in, set up a page for yourself, upload the videos, put the descriptions in where you need to be, and then you can. The great thing about YouTube is that it automatically generates a code that you can either send people to use as a link, or they can embed it into a blog. They can send it to their friends. Yeah,
it extends everywhere. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point that's how I discovered that you were doing this. You and I are friends on Facebook. We've been colleagues for a few years now. And you had posted this. Actually, what was interesting to me was that you had mentioned kind of in a status update that you were editing dozens and dozens of video clips of dogs, which kind of piqued my interest. And then the next day you had a link to it, and there was a graphic and a headline, and I clicked on it, and it brought me right to the YouTube page.
Yeah, and that's the brilliance of the sort of the symbiotic relationship between Facebook and something like YouTube. Is it all you have to do is type in a link.
Right.
When you put these things together, is you type in your link to the YouTube site on Facebook. Facebook does the rest.
Yeah.
It makes it easy for people to see. It makes it easy for them to spread the word. It makes it easy for an organization like the Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia to find a new audience.
Right, and I think that it's worth mentioning too the beauty of of these systems like YouTube and Facebook is it's made for everybody. You don't have to be an IT genius, a programming genius, a web genius
Absolutely
to get
not.
this to work.
Anybody can do it.
A lot of it's so automated. So let's take a listen to one of the pieces. This is Wishbone on the Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia's YouTube channel.
This is Wishbone. He's 2 years old. His mother was a purebred beagle. Wishbone is not a dog who's going to run off and take off. He's a homebody. He wants to be at home with his family, getting petted, getting loved. As you can tell, he's very focused on people all the time.
So now that we have an understanding of, the thinking behind it and how the idea came together, how you actually executed this. It seems like it might have been a lot of work. You said you got it done in an afternoon. So I think, what people would really like to know is, what kind of equipment was involved? Where did you get it? You're a professional in the advertising industry. Did that help? Where did you start with kind of getting all this done, or where would you recommend people start?
Okay, well, the first thing we started with was Judy, the woman you hear on the voice of that video. She is one of the volunteers of the Animal Rescue League, and she has a very good working knowledge of each of these dogs.
Yes. Okay.
And she tells a story that's just wonderful about every dog.
Good point.
What they're like, what their personality is, who they'd be good for. And I think that is one of the keys to doing a very successful video for any pet is you have to know a little bit about this pet.
Right.
And be able to tell the story that if I'm looking to adopt a dog, I really need to know something about it. So I was blessed to have Judy help me.
Yeah.
She made it so easy to talk about, and you can listen to all the dogs that we did. She's got something unique and interesting to say about all of them.
She does. Yeah, she's actually very entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, she is. And so in terms of the equipment I'm using, I used a Sony mini DV camcorder. It's a prosumer camcorder called the VX2100. It's not quite movie making capability, but it's also not a little handheld thing. So it gives you a pretty high quality video. The other thing that I used is called a Rode video mic, because one of the things that I've noticed when I've experimented with videos is that the sound is horrible.
They say sound is half the picture, right?
Yeah, sound is half the picture. And the built-in microphones that most video cameras have nowadays, they're terrible.
Right.
So I had an external camera. It just kind of mounts right on top of it, and it captured the sound perfectly.
Oh, wow.
And I think that is the key for anybody who is, like I said, anybody who is making these movies. Make sure you can hear the audio, because it needs to be clear so that you can get a better sense of the dog's personality, and you get the descriptions very clear. And some computers have sound problems, so you want it to be crystal clear.
Yeah,
so
I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that I've noticed in my working environment at the university is we have a lot of video loggers now, or video bloggers. And one of the things we've done with them is we've taken them to Best Buy and just kind of had the salesperson match a relatively inexpensive microphone to their camera, and it does make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely,
really
it does. And some of the smaller camcorders today are just wonderful.
Yeah,
they take great pictures, and they look wonderful. Especially if you're just doing something on the internet or YouTube, but you have to have a microphone.
Yeah,
you have to have an external microphone.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. Since we're doing a podcast, we do feel audio is, at least half the picture, if not more, if you're listening to the podcast.
Right.
Now tell me about the editing. You did a ton of 30-second clips. Obviously, there's probably more. It didn't look like there was tons of editing, but obviously you did a little bit of finish, a little bit of polish on these. Was that a complex process? What kind of tools did you use? Are there tools that you recommend for beginners that can get similar results, just to make an effective presentation?
Sure, absolutely. We did not have an intense editing process because Judy was so good, and sometimes she got something on one take with one dog. Sometimes some of the dogs would be a little too frisky, so we had to do maybe 2 or 3 edits. What I did is I used a program called Final Cut Express, which is available for Macintosh.
Okay.
I think iMovie, if you use that, is also really good.
Sure.
I don't quite know what Windows programs are available, but the best thing you can do, these programs are really inexpensive, and they give you all the tools you would need to make a decent web video that's only a couple of minutes long.
Right.
And you basically just have to look at your footage, see what makes a great story. Where's the best place to start? Where's the best place to end? Don't put any fluff in that doesn't need to be in there.
Right.
You know.
Well, it goes back to the dogs selling themselves, I think, and what people tend to forget is that just telling the story can be enough.
Right, and Judy, once we did about 3 or 4 of them, she got into a rhythm.
Yeah.
And so she would start off with, with this is Wishbone. Wishbone is this kind of a dog. Wishbone is great with kids.
Right.
This is the story with this dog. This is the situation. She would be great for you, and so on and so forth for about 40 or 45 seconds. Not a very long time. But then it gives you enough to see. And while she's talking, I'm doing my best to capture, get close-ups of the dog.
Yeah.
Get an overall impression of the dog's size relative to Judy herself.
Yeah.
So that people could get at least some good close-up shots of the dog to see the dog's face.
Sure.
And also get a sense of how big the dog is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it's funny you mention all this stuff, and it wasn't anything that I consciously noted as I was watching through the videos, but what I did notice is that I got a full picture of what that dog was about. And that was the most impressive part to me. And I think the crux of that is that there's a lot of thinking and a bit of planning that goes on before you roll tape that can make all the difference in the finished product, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a list of in an order list of which dog we wanted to bring in what order, and then we had a couple of minutes of a little prep time in which we made sure we knew that Judy knew everything she needed to know about the dogs,
right.
And then boom, we roll footage. She starts talking. She goes into her spiel, and after a minute, we're out.
Wow. Yeah. So you really had an efficient process in place.
Yes, we did. I mean, we made sure that you can easily see how if you're not prepared, it could go 5-10 minutes per dog,
right.
Trying to get them to behave, trying to figure out what to say about them. And that could easily drag on to hours and hours and hours. And fortunately, we didn't have to do that. And much of the reason for that was because Judy was so great on camera describing her dogs.
Right. And also, if you're new to the video creation process, the more you shoot, the more you're going to have to edit. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. But
right.
There's nothing like a cookie cutter approach when you're dealing with a large volume like this. Mm-hmm. And I think organizations should think about looking internally. So many high school students and college students are doing this kind of work in their classes, have access to this equipment from their schools, and you and I had to get on film sets before we could learn how to do this kind of stuff. That's not the case anymore. So I think for organizations to look internally to find people like Dan and your colleague that work in these industries or have familiarity with this technology, you can get a lot done. I think something else that might be interesting is if you don't have somebody that is highly proficient or somewhat proficient or interested in doing this kind of work, you might want to look on Craigslist. There's actually a section called television, film, and radio in their want ads, and there's a lot of volunteer work that's posted in there. So we'll post a link to that in the show notes. But Dan, do you have any parting notes for folks that are thinking about doing this or considering it, or have reservations about using new media and YouTube and video on the internet to promote what's going on in their rescue organizations?
Well, the first thing I would do is make sure you have a plan.
Yeah.
And by that I mean not only film these dogs, but make sure that you have a way that people can contact the organization when they're ready to adopt.
Right.
One of the things I did is I made sure that every video had a link to the Pet Finder site, mm-hmm. where you can contact directly the Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia and express your interest in these dogs. There is a little bit of maintenance, not much,
right.
but a little bit of maintenance that needs to be done when you decide you want to put these videos and make them available to the public.
Sure.
And we've had a couple of dogs that have been adopted as a result of people seeing these videos. So you want to be sure that you either tell people that these dogs have been adopted when they've been adopted. You can change their status on a YouTube site, mm-hmm. to say, this dog was already adopted, so
right.
that people are not, falling in love with a dog that's not available. I think that just a little bit of preparation time also on the front end, making sure that you have the right equipment that's working, you have time enough to edit, you have time enough to film, you pick a nice bright day.
Yeah.
And then, once you're done, you look into the different ways of disseminating these videos, whether it's YouTube and Facebook, petfinder.com in this instance, if you have a blog or a friend with a blog or a MySpace page, they can link on it too.
Right.
So there's a whole host of ways to get this done, and it's never been easier. I could not have done this 5 or 6 years ago.
Really, I know what you mean. Well, Dan, thanks a million for joining us, and thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for the work that you do in rescue. This has been the Canine Campus Podcast with our special guest, Dan Goldgeier of the Animal Rescue League of Northwest Georgia, and of course, author of the regular and highly entertaining column View from the Cheap Seats on talentzoo.com. To learn more about Dan's work in video, visit dangoldgeier.com. That's Dan, GOLDGEIER.com. Thanks for listening, and remember that listener feedback is what our show runs on, so if you have a comment or a question, you can leave a voicemail on our homepage at caninecampus.com. Call us on our message line at area code 434-973-1050, or email podcast@caninecampus.com. Also, remember you can sponsor the show and reach thousands of canine enthusiasts with your message. Just drop us a line to find out how to do that. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new show. Your homework right now is to tell a friend about the podcast. And Dan, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Stan.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.